welcome back to our live stream. As mentioned during the last two interviews that we have, my name is Kiana Eves, and I am joined this evening by Miss Jennifer Henderson, one of our new interns. Jennifer, you want to wave to everybody in the chat? One of our new interns for the project, and I'm also joined by Dr. Marylen Harmon. Dr. Harmon is the daughter of Chauncey D. Pugh Harmon, who famously fought and won for the equalization of facilities in Pulaski. So I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to interview her. I have so many questions to ask her. All right, so with that being said, Dr. Harmon, would you like to introduce yourself to our viewers today?
I think you've done it.
Okay.
I am the daughter of Chauncey and Lucy Harmon. And at the time of the Pulaski incident, my mother was not married to my father. My mother was Lucy Martin, and she was a teacher at Calfee. The love affair had not occurred at that time, nor had we come about. But both of my parents are from Pulaski. And that has always been a connection with our family. That Pulaski was always, so to speak, to my parents' home. And home was always important. And my dad would always say, one day Pulaski is going to be on the map. And it's getting there. It's really coming forward. And it's coming forward with this project.
And so for the project, so can you talk a little bit about, so you talked a little bit about your parents and their introductions and their family history and their familial history with Pulaski. So what are you involved in with the project? What is your role?
Well, in the beginning, Guy Smith asked me to come to one of the big early get-togethers, and I saw the interest of what the committee was trying to do, and that continued to grow. And then later, Mickey Hickman and Jill Williams asked me to join the museum portion of it. And Mickey said, I think you could help us if you would. And I said, well, whatever I can do, I will try to help do. So then I started digging through mounds of papers and things that my dad had written snippets of things and collected information, and just somewhat became the historian of Pulaski and gathering materials. And of course, my mom had some of the same kind of things. So now I'm able to go through, pull those things together. I have some pictures and organizations and African-American businesses and churches, church history, and some things that probably have just gotten lost in history. So this will be an opportunity to pull things together and organize them to go in a museum so that it can be shared throughout the state.
And so, and to follow up question on that, so you talked a little bit about how your dad was a historian, but to me, it almost sounds like you're a little bit of a history buff yourself, especially with your contributions to the museum. Is that something that comes natural to you, probably in past occupations or current occupations?
I have a background in social studies and history, and through my travels and all of that, but it's in my DNA. I just can't deny it. And once you start, if you have the love for history, once you get into it, it becomes somewhat addictive. So you find one thing and one thing leads to something else. And it's a form of enjoyment. I enjoy doing it. And Pulaski has always been an interest and still hold value in Pulaski. So I'm glad that whatever I have, I'm willing to share, and then let it be used however the committee wants to use it.
So it sounds like you bring a lot of awesome talents and skills to the museum planning committee and to the Calfee project as a whole. And so I'm curious, are you involved in any other community-based organization within your community? Are you still in Pulaski? Or are you outside of Pulaski?
No, I live in Roanoke County, and I belong to a lot of civic organizations in the Roanoke Valley area. I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated of 53 years, member of the Links Incorporated. Spectrum is a diversity group. I have been on the board and served as somewhat of an advisor or to give information to the Salem Museum. I'm a reenactor for the Ghost Walk for the Salem Museum. And the Ghost Walk is where the museum researches the history of African Americans in the Salem area during the 1800 period. And then we reenact, but it's not just African Americans. I'm usually am the African American portrayer, but they have other historical people and they tour the cemetery and we become alive that night and give the history. So again, that's history. And the Harrison Museum, I have participated with Harrison in resources and I'm with the Roanoke Retired Teachers. And I'm also on the Pulaski Courthouse Committee. So I'm kind of bouncing back from one place to the other. And then I'm on the board of the One Valley Carver Garden Committee. And we have a community garden in the low income area of the historic Gainsborough district, which urban renewal consumed the Black homes of that area. And so now it is a food desert with no grocery stores and only a few convenience stores. And so what we're doing is trying to build this garden. The project is important because it will teach low-income minority children, and we're also including their parents. We don't want them to just drop off their children. Their parents how to raise fresh vegetables, and we also will be having some cooking classes, and we'll go through a different series of growing. So right now I'm growing some things ahead of time in my kitchen. If they keep growing, I might go straight from the kitchen to the pot rather than into the ground. They're growing so nicely. But we will be targeting children ages 5 through 12, and we'll give them activities to do. So we start this Saturday, and we'll have roughly 25 at a time. But last year, before COVID, we were able to work with Apple Ridge Farm, and the students from Apple Ridge would come down and help. And then on Saturdays, they would sell the produce. So that also gave some income. So those are the kinds of things, and we'll be working with TAP and Scouts and other youth organizations will be joining with us. So again, most of the things that I belong to are all of them are volunteer with no pay. But the pay is that you give back to society for the blessings that you have. So it's rewarding to say that things are beginning to really grow now that we're kind of coming out of COVID. We'll be able to have more contact actually with the youth. And we're, as all other organizations, seeking funding. But it is bringing back some unity to the community as well. And somewhat looking after the elderly, because it's a pretty elderly connected community. And a lot of the places formerly had homes. And it's in the area, some people may be familiar with where Coca-Cola is, but that used to be homes of African Americans. So it's a lot of displacement there. And also where the Berglund Civic Center is. Those were all homes of African Americans. So some of this is helping with the healing process to bring renewal to that Gainesboro area. So in the things that I have been asked to participate in, or some cases come up with an idea, have been a give back kind of thing to help with renewal of not only the community, but the people and their hearts. So that's a little bit of some of what I'm doing. So I've been, now that we have not been meeting formally, I have been Zooming every day. There's some kind of Zoom. So if I could, the song, I Believe I Can Fly, every day I'm flying with somebody's Zoom. But it's rewarding when you can see the results will be positive to help someone else. And to see young people like Oscar, and to be at that age and get the sensitivity of, I must help somebody. And it's not all about me. If you can get that over, I think that's a big step. That life extends far beyond me. And it's a blessing that I have been given, that I feel that I have to give back.
And give back, you certainly do. I was trying to keep a mental tracker of all of those committees, and I'm like, how do you
There are more.
function?
There are more.
So I do have a follow-up question, if you don't mind, about the Carter Garden. Now, that wouldn't happen to have anything to do with George Washington Carver, would it? Because I know that through studying some of the history that your father had some interaction with that, but I was wondering if you would be willing to share some of that with some of our viewers tonight that may be unfamiliar with that history.
The idea came from the organizer, Tom Kane, who is now deceased. But Tom and I were talking at a Juneteenth event. And Tom had been over at the Harrison Museum, and he had seen a display on George Washington Carver, and that was our first time of meeting. So we were chatting, and he said, you know, I'm working on the project, and he started talking about what later became the One Valley Project. And he said, I saw a nice display on George Washington Carver and agricultural efforts that he had. And I said, oh, well, that display actually is mine. And so I said the photographs and all came out of some of my dad's collection. So he said, how so? And actually, when my father and mother were growing up, you could only go to the 9th grade in Pulaski if you were African Americans. And the idea was if you went to 12th grade, you would be equal to whites. So African Americans had to stop at 9th grade. And my grandparents on the Harmon side sent my dad to Tuskegee. He was 14, just hadn't quite turned 15. And they put him on a train, and he went from Pulaski, Virginia to Tuskegee, Alabama for high school. And they tested him, which was normal, to test to see what grade placement students would be put in. And he skipped 10th grade. And they said, whoa, well, where is this place, Pulaski, okay? And he said, yes, I'm from Pulaski. So they said, well, we're going to move you forward to the 11th grade. When my mother became a 9th grader, she was 2 years behind my dad. So my grandparents, the Martins, put my mother as a 14-year-old on the train and waved goodbye, and she went to Tuskegee. So both of them, and they tested her. And fortunately, she skipped. They said, well, there's a smart young man here, and his name is Chauncey Harmon. Where is this Pulaski, Virginia? And she said, it's in Southwest Virginia. And so they said, well, Chauncey Harmon is a smart young man, and he passed the test, and he skipped the grade. And so she said, well, if he skipped the grade, I had the same teachers, so I'll likely skip the grade too. So they said, well, I don't know. And they did, and she did skip there were other students who were put back, and they were put back because many of them didn't have the same opportunity. They were sharecroppers. They didn't have as much time in school or the type of teachers that came out of Calvert. And so at Tuskegee, they had a science teacher, and the science teacher was George Washington Carver. They had to go to Sunday school, and their Sunday school teacher was George Washington Carver. So Dr. Carver was a central part of their lives, and my mother worked in the dining hall, so she had to see that Dr. Carver got his meals. And my dad worked somewhat like an assistant to work around him to get animals that Russia had sent for autopsies and other kinds of things. And he just kind of hung around Dr. Carver. They didn't see him at the status that we see him now. They just thought he was a little bit unusual and eccentric, but he was their teacher. And out of that, with my both parents were saying how many inventions he would come up with things. And he made my mom some taffy out of peanuts. And that taffy candy lasted for almost 20 years until my aunt ate it. And she said it tasted good and it was still kind of fresh. And he used to crochet, and Dr. Carver made all the girls little collars to wear, crocheted collars to wear to Sunday school. So they had a personal side of George Washington Carver. So as Tom and I began to talk about the agricultural side, he said, I think we should name that garden Carver Garden because of agricultural growing nature and all of that type of thing. So in the garden, we will have vegetables, and we have one side where we will have fruit trees and herbal garden along with the other vegetation. So that's how we came about with the name Carver, and it is connected with George Washington Carver, the scientist, agriculturalist.
That is incredible. I'm sorry, that's absolutely blowing
And
my mind.
also 30 years later, after all of the Pulaski incident and all, my dad became principal of Carver in Salem. And then in 1953, and my mom joined the staff in 54 when our family moved to Salem. So it was like a full circle, and it was during segregated time. So Carver was a consolidated school. And so I began first grade at Carver and went all 12 grades at Carver. My brother started at Calvert and was from grades 1 to 3 at Calvert. But we certainly had the Carver experience, one way or another.
Yeah, I would certainly say you did. So going back to some things you mentioned about your mother and some things about segregation, I'm just curious, as someone that's sort of an outsider looking in, that didn't have that firsthand experience, did conversations about segregation come up in your household? And if so, what was your mother's role in that? How did she feel?
Oh, it came up because I lived it. All the way through school, I was in segregated situation. It was certainly different. We didn't have the same books. We had another school that was one street up, and that was Andrew Lewis. So we had to wait until they finished using the books before we could have the books. So I can say that I probably never had a book that had all the pages to it, but we had to become resourceful by calling each other and having somebody to read what they had on the page. Teachers would not excuse us for not having an assignment because we didn't have the page. It was up to us to become resourceful enough to find somebody with that page and have the assignment done by the next day. So, and I grew up where the signs clearly told us that we were in the segregated side, and we had to live in a certain section south of Main Street. So my parents didn't have to talk about it a whole lot because we were living it, but the neighborhood was protective, and education was always in the forefront. My teachers were well educated, and I would say at Carver, as well as, and I've come across the looking at the teachers at Calfee and their degrees, and most of them had academic four-year college degrees. And my teachers that I had at Carver, I would say at least 95% of them had master's degrees. And the state of Virginia would actually pay a teacher to go out of state rather than to be educated in the state. So both of my parents got their masters from Columbia University, and the state paid for it and gave them a stipend during the summer, which didn't make sense. They could have walked 3 blocks and been at Roanoke College. But that was the going of the time. But segregation to integration was not an easy thing, but it's something we need to look at very carefully, because we may be going backward with some of the things that are going on now. But looking at education, you can see that both of my parents, as well as others that could only go to 9th grade, and many of them, when you look at Prince Edward County, they just cut school off. And we did have some students to come to Carver that knew somebody locally that they could live with. But for other students, that stopped their education. And some in Pulaski, it stopped. But with this project, a lot of African Americans as well as whites did not know the true history of how students made it to Christiansburg Institute. It was the struggle that my dad had with the lawsuit and Mr. Willis Gravely. And later on, because they were considered troublemakers, too far ahead of their time, if they had waited, things would change. But my dad said, how long do we wait? And at 25 years old, he did initiate the lawsuit, which brought in Thurgood Marshall. And so Pulaski has a lot of history that is now being uncovered. A lot of these people are gone, but they're not forgotten. And that's important. And to see Mrs., I still call her Mrs. DeBerry, Mrs. Venable. And she lived with my grandmother for a while, stayed at my grandmother's house. But she is so vibrant even now. I wouldn't mess with with Miss DeBerry because she's proven the test, and she's encouraging to just hear her history, and the more we talk and to get around different people, it's a learning process for all of us. So I'm just delighted to be part of the project for whatever I can offer.
I would say you offer a whole lot. But I would like to add, I to the viewers watching, I bring up segregation. I think you brought up a lot of awesome points in that that section there, because I think sometimes, we think about history and we think like hundreds, thousands of years in the past, but I don't think people realize how recent some of this stuff was, and it was right here in our own backyard. And I think that some of the things you shared with our viewers today is just so powerful, and I think you really highlighted some of that. So that brings me to my next question, which is, what are your future hopes for the CCCC? What would you like to see the project become in its fruition once everything is rolled out?
Hopefully funding will come. When the money comes, they will build it. I'm hoping that the building will be renovated so that all of the proposals of the naming of these rooms and the educational center and the museum, all of that will serve as a community center to bring the community together, not just Black, not just white, not just one particular group, but that it will be a unifying agent and a historical venture for the community. And so that people can have a real sense of pride of how working together can produce something of high esteem. And Senator Warner came, and so he is in line to know what's going on Southwest Virginia. In many cases, people forget Southwest Virginia, and they think that Virginia ends at Richmond, but we're still here, and Pulaski is definitely still here. And I was talking to Sam Rasul, who is now running, he's the delegate of the 11th district in the Valley, but he is running for lieutenant governor. And he's very interested in what's going on in Pulaski. And hopefully, as we expand, we'll get people to come in, that it will just be field trips, and it can be used for plays, and Kendall can do productions there, and the computer lab, maybe I'll come up and get some tutoring clearly with need, but it will come alive. And the whole city, one day I was up there, and the police department happened to be there, and I said, well, why are the police here? And they were helping to clean out the place, and I'm going, the police are in on this. So it's just a wonderful experience, and hoping to see that it will tie young people as well as provide for the elderly, and be cultural center for Southwest Virginia. So I'm on a high.
You're on a high. Like, I can tell. I mean, I'm excited. You're right. We have a lot of people really excited about the project. I mean, I'm learning all this. I feel like I know I grew up here, but like I didn't hear this version of history at all. Okay, well, I think that concludes all of the questions that I had prepared for you this evening. So now I would like to open the floor up to Jennifer to give her the opportunity to ask you any follow-up questions that she may have in terms of your involvement with the project or some of your background.
So like what Kiana was just saying, as a student here in this area, and especially in Roanoke, we didn't learn anything about the gentrification of downtown or anything like that. And it's so crazy hearing it, like, because nobody talks about it. And I think that's so important that Calfee's is finally starting to bring light to this. So I'd just like to say thank you for your involvement in this project. And you're really inspiring with your entire story that you've said. So thank you.
Sure. I'm glad you're in.
I'm glad to have learned about it. So we've talked a lot about your dad, but with your mom, I'm sure your mom has like special influence over you. Can you talk a little bit about how your mom shaped you into your love for your community?
My mom, as I said, was from Pulaski too, but she and those that lived around her, they were known as the mountain people. They lived off a Door Highway up in the mountain, and they walked, the African American children walked out of the mountain. There were white kids that lived in the mountain too. They would walk out together, but the white kids would get on the bus and wave goodbye, and the African American children, which would have included my mom, they had a 4.5-mile walk. So as a first grader, she started her walk toward education, and her siblings would say, those that were older in the mountain said, on your first day of school, something special will happen to you and you'll be excited. So her first day of school, she was walking, and she said it was her fault. She jumped in front of a car, and a car ran over on day one. And so they ran to get my grandmother, and by the time that she came out of the mountain to the road. My mom had caught up with the other kids and skipped on to school. And when she came back, my grandmother said, how was school today? She said, fine. And a car ran over me and I'm going back tomorrow. She never stopped learning. She never stopped wanting to be educated. And those quite often the white kids in the mountain would wait for the black ones to come back from their 4-mile walk, 4.5-mile walk, because they had already ridden the bus back to where they would go up in the mountain. And so, but they didn't, even after my mom started teaching, they still didn't have a school bus. So she was paying Mr. Ed Cox to come and pick her up. But she was walking that for a while as a teacher to get to school. So endurance, perseverance. She always said, my legs don't hurt because I had to walk all my life, all the time. But she grew up on a farm. And when she was teaching in Salem, she had told the students that she had to milk a cow and she had to go out and get the chickens and all. And one of the parents said, when the little boy told his dad, he said, the only cow Miss Harmon has seen has been a picture of one. So when he came to the conference, she said, no, I'm gonna tell you about what it was like. And he said, I never would have thought you came off of a farm. But both of my parents, my dad lived on the hill. He could just slide off the hill to school, but mama had the 4.5-mile walk. And many of them were first graders, but they were just, their parents pushed them toward education. My grandfather, my mother's father used to say, nobody can run over you if you have knowledge. You can overcome anything. And my father's parents were pretty much the same. And to have a good name. My dad used to say, you don't always have to have a lot of money, but if you have a good name, you can get it. So work hard for what you deserve and put God first. It was always put God first for both of them. And things will fall in place. But nothing was easy for either one of them. But mama raised both parents raised us. My dad was an in-home dad, even though he was a principal. And when Dr. Tripp started his research, he asked, can I do my thesis for my doctorate on your dad? And I said, okay, if you can find enough information. Well, he found 400 and some pages and handwritten letters from the Library of Congress, from Thurgood Marshall to my dad and back and forth. But he was just daddy to us. But both of them ran a tight household. They were always together. And education, it was just, you have to get educated. And then my teachers were pushers for that. And I could see that they worked hard. So they expected high expectations from me. But mama was mama, but mama meant business. And they both looked at the students, at Calfee as well. Those were considered their children. And I would say, well, what about us? Well, these are my children. And that with the lawsuit, every time Superintendent Bruce and Kreiser would try to knock down something, my dad would say, but you're not going to do this to my children. So all the children at Calfee was almost like his birth children. You're not going to leave my children behind, because he knew the struggle, because he had been through the struggle. Mama had been through the struggle. And it always, my mom said it always hurt my dad that he had to leave home and that he could not, at the end, after winning the suit, that he and Mr. Gravely were terminated, which would not happen now in today's time. It just wouldn't happen. That would be lawsuit number one. But both of them were well matched together. as far as go-getters, having foresight and courage. Kendall put it as quiet courage. My dad, I don't ever remember him raising his voice, or my mom. They never touched us as far as spanking or anything. And sometimes that may have worked for some, but it was always come and have a seat. And it was, oh Lord, here we go. Could you just hit me one time and let me go? But they always would sit down and talk. And they got probably better results than to give us a whack or two.
To that effect, I said one final question, but then you sparked another question. It sounds like you got a lot of awesome advice, both at home in educational settings and in professional settings. So what advice would you give to up and coming young women? You know, you are definitely a successful individual yourself. So do you have any advice to pass on to the viewers that tuned in this evening?
Well, women have always been leaders. They have run the households. They have been the spiritual side. And now society is beginning to recognize women. And women are almost holding any kind of jobs that a man could hold. And so what you conceive and dream, there should be no stopping. If one door closes, find another door. And if you can't find the door, just cut another door. That there are opportunities. And that's what happened. That's how I got to a doctorate degree. Dr. Tran was one of my professors at Radford when I got my master's. And he said, you know, now's the time, because you're a woman, you need to go work on your doctorate. And I said, I need to go home and sit down. I am tired. And this was back in the 70s. And then about 2 days later, I started rethinking that and led on to the degree. But find somebody who you can mentor, get some guidance from, try to invest yourself in trying to seek the knowledge. But there's so much talent out there, and young people. I'm working with AXO, which is a division of the NAACP, and we have some young people who are competing. Last year we had 2 bronze winners, and they're in STEM and science and music and all other areas. And I'm just so excited to see young people moving forward, that the song says, ain't no stopping us now. And so it's no stopping. The only thing, there are roadblocks, and need not think that there won't be roadblocks, but there will be things that can overcome. And I've learned so much through traveling, because traveling has been part of me as well. And after I finished college and all, I've been able to travel to every continent except Antarctica. And it extended from my history teacher. Mr. Prenny would say to us, you better sit up in here and pay attention, because one day you're going to get to Egypt. And I said, he is out of his tree, because we can't even get to Lakeside, which was an amusement park. It was not integrated. And I said, we can't get to Lakeside. Now, how am I going to get to Egypt? Well, many years later, I was on a camel in Egypt, and I said, Mr. Prenny, I made it. So sometimes just that little word that gets instilled in you will be a push. So women, and you as well, you have so much to offer. So my 3rd grade teacher used to say, just keep on keeping on.
Just keep on keeping on. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our interview today. So just continue to check back on our social media page for updates, and I will let you know if we're going to have another one. Thank you guys. Bye.